The Association of the United States Army is pleased to welcome you to AUSA's Thought Leaders Webinar Series, a webinar series featuring military leaders and contemporary military authors. Kicking off today's webinar is AUSA's Vice President of Education, Lieutenant General Guy Swan.
Welcome to the Association of the United States Army's Thought Leaders Webinar Series. Thank you for joining us today, and while we wish we could all be together here at AUSA, obviously that's not possible in today's environment. So what we've done is we've crafted a series of events to bring you senior Army leaders, authors, and other personalities speaking on topics of current interest to America's Army, all in a live and virtual interactive forum. We're glad you've joined us, and we really appreciate your support as partners in the defense of our great nation. Just over 2 years ago, we at AUSA established a new graphic novel series to recognize the heroes of the United States Army who have been awarded the Medal of Honor. We highlight 4 heroes each year from different eras of the U.S. Army's rich history, and just completed our second annual edition of these popular graphic novels. The series has had great reception across a wide variety of audiences, from historians to high school students, from veterans to even graphic novel enthusiasts who may not know much about America's Army. But most importantly, in keeping with AUSA's mission, this series educates today's soldiers about their Army and those fellow soldiers who have sacrificed so much for each other and for our great nation. Joining us today to discuss the Medal of Honor graphic novel series are members of the creative team. We could not have done this without the talents of the artists and writers that you will be hearing from over the next hour or so. To moderate today's discussion, we're also joined by Joe Craig, the director of the AUSA book program and the father of the Medal of Honor graphic novel series. Joe continues to be our point man on this important project, and he's already preparing for the 2021 edition. So with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Joe.
Well, thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. And as General Swan mentioned, this year we did launch a second volume of the Medal of Honor graphic novel series. And we started with the issue Medal of Honor Daniel Inouye. Most people know Inouye as the long-serving senator from Hawaii, but during World War II, he was a Japanese-American volunteer who was fighting, leading his men in Italy, and lost his arm in the last few weeks of the war. We then moved on to profiles of Henry Johnson, an African-American who fought with the Harlem Hellfighters, one of the first units to go over to France to fight in World War I. He was awarded the French Croix de Guerre and became a national hero back here in the States. Our third issue was on Mary Walker. She was a surgeon contracted with the U.S. Army during the Civil War, and she is to date still the only female recipient of the award. And finally, we did a book on Tibor Rubin, who was a Holocaust survivor as a teenager. He later moved to the United States and joined the U.S. Army, the army that had liberated him from the camps, and then later went on to fight in Korea. And all these books have been made possible thanks to support from General Dynamics, from help and guidance from historians and archivists and other scholars who help vet the material, and mostly thanks to the tremendous talent of the group of creative professionals that we've taken from the world of professional comic book publishing. And some of them are here today, and we want to welcome them and get a little bit of insights into what it's like to work on this series. So first up is Chuck Dixon, who's the scriptwriter for the series. He's actually worked on every issue that we've published so far. And in his 30 years as a writer for Marvel, DC Comics, and other publishers, Chuck Dixon has built a reputation as a prolific and versatile freelancer, working on a wide variety of titles and genres, from Conan the Barbarian to SpongeBob SquarePants. His graphic novel adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit continues to be an international bestseller. It's been translated into 50 languages. He's the co-creator with Graham Nolan of the Batman villain Bane. Bane was the first enduring member added to the Dark Knight's Rogues Gallery in over 40 years. Chuck was also one of the seminal writers responsible for the continuing popularity of Marvel Comics' The Punisher. We're also joined by several of the artists who did the line work for the books. First, we have Christopher Ivy, who was the artist for the Daniel Inouye book. And after graduating from Parsons School of Design in New York City, Christopher Ivy started his career at Marvel Comics. He was working as an inker on such titles as Daredevil, Cage, Avengers, Alpha Flight, Ghost Rider, Hulk, Mark Spector Moon Knight, Marvel Comics Presents, Cloak and Dagger, Punisher, Wolverine, X-Men, and Spider-Man. His inking credits include work for DC Comics with Sovereign 7, Flash, JLA, Beast Boy, Young Justice, Titans, Wonder Girls, and Superman. He worked with Image Comics for Shadowhawk, Supreme, Grifter, Image Swimsuit #1, and various Image character trading cards. And Dark Horse Comics with Alien vs. Predator, Alien vs. Predator vs. Terminator, Terminator The Dark Years, Star Wars Bounty Hunters, Phoenix Kill, and Planet of the Apes. Most recently, Chris has added critically acclaimed runs at IDW, including G.I. Joe Cobra Civil War with Javier Soltaris, and Dynamite Entertainment with Army of Darkness and Cryptozoic Man. Another artist joining us today is P.J. Holden, who worked on the Henry Johnson book. P.J. Holden is a Belfast-based comic, and he's been a comic artist. He's been working professionally for 2 decades. P.J. is best known for his work on Judge Dredd for the British comic 2000 AD. P.J.'s drawn hundreds of pages of war comics, most of which have been written by Garth Ennis. And so far, these works have included bomber flights over the Ruhr in the Happy Valley, German-Russian tank battles in Kursk with World of Tanks, Operation Citadel, and most recently, the story of the ferry swordfish biplane torpedo bomber and its attack on the Bismarck in a book called The String Bags. Next, we are also joined by Karl Moline, who was the artist for the Mary Walker book. And Karl Moline has been a professional comic book artist working for all the major comics publishers over the last 20 years. He's best known for his work on Buffy the Vampire Slayer and co-creating Frey with Joss Whedon. But he's also worked on titles such as Superboy, Supergirl, Avengers Arena, Avengers Academy, Rogue, Route 666, Daredevil 2099, Loners, Seekers of the World, Hulk Smash Avengers, BPRD, and Spider-Man Unlimited, among others. And finally, we have the colorist for the series. Pete has, like Chuck, worked on every issue that's come out. And Peter Pantazis has worked on projects for DC Entertainment, Marvel, and Disney, including such high-profile titles as Black Panther, Superman, Justice League of America, The Incredible Hulk, and Wolverine. And most recently, Pantazis has illustrated a new version of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. So I'd like to welcome all the artists to come back on board, and we would like to have a nice roundtable discussion of the work. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is just how you got involved in comics. What interested you as a child, and how did you get your first break in the business? So I thought maybe we'd start with you, Chuck. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, comics were everywhere, and a lot of comic creators share the same origin. I was sick a lot as a child, and relatives would bring me comics to pass the time, and I just immersed myself in them. And I never really ever thought about ever doing anything else but having a career in comic books. And my first really big break came at Marvel when they started doing a book centered around war and Western stories. And I broke in there with the editor, Larry Hama, the creator of all the popular G.I. Joe characters. And went full time from there, never looked back for 35 years.
Wow. And how about you, Pete? How did you get into the business?
Oh, well, a little bit different for me. I grew up with my big brother's comics stacked in front of me. So I got a taste of almost every era of comic books, like Golden Age, Silver Age,
I
Right.
had a slightly roundabout route. Like everyone, I read comics as a kid. I grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and sort of escaped from that by reading as many comics as I could, which were mostly war comics. Oddly, British comics at that point were kind of driven by anthology titles that were typically war comics, and it was only later that the sci-fi comic 2000 AD started up and kind of ate everything before it. It just sort of swept everything away. But I kind of sidelined into IT, working in computers from about the age of 14 until about the age of 37, I think. But even at that, even while sort of maintaining an IT career, I was drawing comics, and about the year 2000, it was getting to the point where it was like, well, I'm going to be 30 at the year 2000, so in 2000 ADs, I think I've always wanted to do, so I should really take this a bit more seriously because it's that year. So it's sort of midlife crisis kind of panic, and sent some stuff to 2000 AD, and they accepted it, and I started working from then from then on. But it took another 7 or 8 years before I kind of left my IT job, because frankly, I enjoyed working in computers as well. So
Right.
I used to think it was, but at the same time that I kind of broke into British comics, sort of breaking into 2008 at age 30, at that point, there were about 2 or 3 other guys you'll probably have heard of. Jock, for example, and Fraser Irving, both sort of broke into 2000 AD, both around the age of 30, both around the same year. So I don't know if it was just something in the water that year, or whether on the run up to it, I suspect that the comics industry, as you know, for anyone who's been in it for any length of time, knows it's had these kind of cycles of kind of boom and bust and boom and bust. And I suspect we'd gone through a bust of the industry where there weren't any jobs for a long time. There just wasn't enough work out there for a lot of people. So even though the talent was there was just no way for that talent to be expressed in print. There was just none of the work was there. And then sort of around 2000, there was a bit of a change in the UK in terms of I mean, it's as simple as this. An editor changed, and that suddenly opened the doors a bit more for a lot of new people. And I think that happens everywhere. When an editor moves on, they take people with them, and it also frees space for new people to come in. So to me, it seems like the most natural thing in the world, but I've been doing it I've been drawing comics now for about 20 years. So it feels like that's what I've been doing most of my life, even though most of my life I was working in IT, so which I've completely forgotten about. So I'm no use to any of your IT problems right now.
Basically, I ended up moving out to California after studying art in college in New York at FIT, and I got a job across the street from Wildstorm Productions, and had no idea they were there. My eyes bugged out when I found out. One of the guys that worked there walked in to the art studio that I was working in and saw some of my sketches and said, "Hey, we're hiring for colorists." And I grabbed my portfolio, ran over there with a new suit, applied for a job, got it, and that was the start of my comic book career.
Karl, I see that you're back with us, so we'll go back to that question about for you. What was your introduction to the comics?
I had a couple of false starts, actually. I got hired the first time in my young 20s by Harris Comics, that was at the time doing Vampirella, and did a couple of issues for them right before the bubble burst in the 90s, when comics kind of imploded, and those issues were never published. They didn't have any more work. I ended up doing an issue or a couple issues for Marvel, but those again were a one-shot deal, and then years went by without any more work. Finally, I started submitting more pencil samples to various editors, and Dan Raspler from DC Comics had taken me sort of under his wing, said, you know, you're good enough, but I'm going to run you through the dojo moves. And for a couple of months, he gave me assignments, and I would turn those into him every week, but along with him, like 15 other editors. And after a couple of months of that, I got a call from Scott Alley over at Dark Horse Comics, and he brought me on a book. I did a couple of very short stories for him, but while I was doing that, he was shopping artists for Joss Whedon, who was looking for an artist for his first comic book, and he sort of picked me out of the lineup, and I ended up drawing Frey for Dark Horse Comics, and that ended up being the actual start of my career when, everybody knows Joss Whedon's name. So sort of put me in the limelight a little bit. But yeah, I've been steadily employed doing comics ever since.
Great. Yeah, and you mentioned Joss Whedon, and in your bio, we talked about some of the other crossovers. Can you tell us a little bit about crossovers at independent publishers and how the independents kind of differ from the big guys of Marvel and DC?
Honestly, I haven't had much of a difference really in working with either of them. I've noticed with licensed properties, there's an extra level of getting the big company license holder to approve your stuff, and everybody wants to justify their job. So there's, always a lot more edits and changes and things to something that Fox owns, or, another company might, Hasbro, they've got their own executives to put you through the ringer as well. But basically it was the same working for the smaller guys as the bigger guys. They hand me a script and I give them pictures. So.
Right. All right. And finally, Chris, just for that intro question, how about you? What brought you into comics?
I can remember as early as 5 or 6. I think it was in an airport in Germany, seeing a big magazine rack with comics on the end and getting hooked as far back as that, 5 or 6. Right after art school, actually literally the week after art school, I started working as an intern at Marvel. If anybody remembers the How to Draw the Marvel Way book from the 70s and 80s, and then a contest to try and get work for Marvel. I remember entering that contest in my last year of art school in '87, and I didn't win, but the consolation was that I got a call from Don Perlin, if anybody's familiar with that name, stalwart Marvel artist from the 60s to the 70s, and co-designed Moon Knight. He called and said, "Would you want to work for John Romita and I as an intern at Marvel?" I said, "Of course, sure," even though I was totally disheartened that I didn't win the contest. And I actually started working full-time as an intern at Marvel, and moved after about a year from internship to full-time freelance as an inker. And several years later, that kind of spread to working for DC, Image, Dark Horse, Valiant, and kept me pretty busy through the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, that's a common theme with all of you guys, both working as freelancers and for the studios. You've all been incredibly busy. Chuck, we've seen that you've had a lot of experience with military comics. We heard about the Punisher in the introduction. You also worked with G.I. Joe and the NAM. Can you tell us, what's the difference between working on, fiction military titles like that and your work here with the Medal of Honor series?
Well, I've always been used to doing the homework because, when you're doing war comics, half your audience are military aficionados and they're looking for errors. So you've got to be diligent. And I'm interested in that anyway. I want to be accurate. I want to tell the stories, even if they're fictional, as accurately as possible. But it's a big difference working on the nonfiction stuff. And, Joe, better than anybody else, it was baby steps at first, because my first script for Sergeant York was a typical comic book story I might have done for DC and Marvel. And you quickly got me in line. These had to be a little less fanciful than I was used to writing. And yourself and the team of historians you brought on board sort of schooled me on all this stuff. And it went smoother after that. But that first one was a little bit rough, because I think that first one had more rewrites than we've ever done before on anything. And but it's even when you're dealing with a genre like war, which is set in a quote unquote real world, it's a big difference between fiction and nonfiction.
Right. Well, I mean, we did have some of those little hiccups at the beginning, but you quickly adapted, and as it became clear with your work and with all the others, these stories are so remarkable that they really don't need a lot of embellishing to make them interesting. So. PJ, you had mentioned in your introduction that growing up in Belfast, you were introduced to a lot of British war comics. And I was just curious, for an American audience, can you tell us about British war comics? Why are they so popular over there? And how do they differ from military titles over here?
Well, the first thing I'd have to say is that the format of them is different. The British war comics from the 70s and 80s would have been black and white for a start. The artwork would have been all black and white, which I always feel is very different to full color artwork. And I actually, I mean, I'm sorry, Pete, but 9 times out of 10, I prefer black and white artwork. But that, but also good coloring's good. But they were also the titles were typically anthology titles, so they would have 5 or 6 short stories within a collection of 5 or 6 stories, 5 or 6 page stories within a collection. And there were 2 distinct titles of war comics in the UK. There was a title called Warlord, which was definitely more in the fanciful end of war title stuff. And then there was a comic called Battle, and Battle was much more grounded. It was still kind of made up characters, made up situations, but very frequently it was grounded in reality. It was grounded in the kind of the blood and guts of real battles. And so there was a kind of difference, not just in how it was drawn, but how it was written. So I didn't really get much exposure to American war comics. I can't honestly put an easy comparison side by side. But I do know that kind of, when I think of war stories, when I go to illustrate war stories, in my head, I'm always trying to evoke that black and white kind of, even black and white films from that period. Because the other thing as well is, growing up in that period, with, like a lot of people, 3 or 4 TV channels, mostly black and white. It was mostly black and white war movies. That was the stuff you were exposed to as you were growing up. While there were soldiers on the streets. I mean, that was the other thing. Actual, the British Army walking around and stuff, helicopters landing and outside your front door with soldiers running out with rifles and stuff. And me being 7 or 8 going, "Oh, that looks really cool."
Well, certainly being exposed to real life soldiers must have an impact on the work. And Chris, that raised an interesting point, that you were raised in a military family. Your father had served in Korea and Vietnam. So how did that real life connection to the military affect the course of your work?
Well, actually, it obviously made a lot of my taste in comics, just like everybody else is articulating, have a lean towards military comics and actually military media. I love movies, TV shows about the military. There's great documentaries in the 70s too about World War II and the Vietnam War that I was always curious about. I guess it's literally. I guess I can't describe something that I was just like a day-to-day existence. All my friends, parents were military. We obviously lived on military posts. With that connection to the military on a day-to-day basis, I think even more than somebody that enlisted as a soldier that might just be there for however many years. For me, it was a lifetime of that, all the way up until my adulthood. So to me, it's just very a commonplace, just a part of my life, just as it is now, and just kind of affects my taste in just about everything to this very day. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but military's, like I said, just been part of my whole life.
All right. And those kind of connections are obviously important. Pete, you had mentioned back when we were working on the first series of books that you had some, albeit more distant connections with Audie Murphy. Both family and the Audie Murphy Ranch being nearby. Does admiration for a particular character influence the way you work on a book?
Well, absolutely. The thing for me, that connection was that my wife's mom, her dad knew and served with Audie Murphy, and it didn't even come up in her memory until I started working on the project, and she said, "Oh, who is that?" And then we looked it up, and she brought it up, and she brought up these photos, and I was like, "Wow, this is an amazing connection." But the thing that I've thought about that really makes these projects important, a little bit more important to me, is the one time my wife's uncle, he served in Vietnam. He was part of the 101st, and he's up there in age, and he had a rough time with it. And I sat in with him on one time when he went to the VA and heard him talk about his experience, which he doesn't really talk about a lot. And that changed my entire viewpoint on everything having to do with the military and what I could never grasp what they've ever sacrificed and done for. So for me, trying to get these books to look as great as possible from my point, it has been extremely important because of that.
Right. And, working on individual characters, Karl, you have been, well known for your work with Buffy and Frey. And, in the world of comics, female characters don't always get the same level of recognition that male characters do. And obviously, with your work on the Mary Walker book, I'm wondering how that figured into your portrayal of her.
Oh, I felt super honored to be the guy to tell her story, considering she's the only female recipient. But Chuck and I both have made our bones on telling stories about powerful female heroes. And I felt almost like my time on Frey or the stuff I did at CrossGen Comics was sort of leading to that moment. To get to tell Mary's story. But no, I feel like it's a strange time in general. Like the whole world, female empowerment has sort of been growing in society, and to just capture a little bit of that and get to honor her contribution to the women's movement and what she meant to the world was a big honor for me. So, yeah. I've always felt a little like a girl myself. I brought these females to life in my comics. I have always had sort of a sensitive temperament, so it was a good fit for me to be the artist to bring these powerful women to life. But Chuck can talk a little bit about his female leads. He's had quite a few over the years.
Yeah, Birds of Prey, Evangeline, Valkyrie.
What's been the hardest one to do, Chuck? Do you think
the hardest which?
The hardest of the stories that you've done, the most difficult one to get into?
I usually don't accept the job unless I know I can get into it. So
Okay.
I've been offered jobs where I say, give me a day to think about it, and then I come back and say, no, this isn't for me. I can't. It's not that I don't like it. It's that someone else would do a better job on it. So I don't take something until I'm into it. And I can get into anything. I used to write Raggedy Ann and Andy books. So.
Wow. I didn't realize you had done Evangeline.
Yeah, that was actually my first color comic.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, I had no idea.
Color comic. Hey, I did want to say that there's really nothing like a beautifully inked black and white image to just take a look at. Nothing like it at all. I love them. I'm an artist myself, so having a beautifully inked black and white image is great. I really hope that what I bring to the table is just helping to tell the story and nothing more.
I honestly think black and white is a preference. It's an artist's preference more than it's a reader preference. I think readers tend to like color more than and like is the wrong word. Maybe it's more accessible to a to a non-artist. Maybe it's a more accessible thing to open it and see, you understand everything that's in there. It does add a layer of complexity to the artwork, I think, to the research that's required. Chris, how do you find the research?
I happen to like both myself.
Yeah, I really appreciated black and white comics.
All the artists on the team.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I like black and white just as well as color, because I'm a fan of art and comics, and never want to try and kind of push one over the other. There are plenty of black and white titles that I love to read and collect still, along with the color stuff. That's it. I put my little bits in there.
Right. I was just saying, I think as line artist, I always appreciated black and white because that was my contribution to it. And then slowly, as I learned digital media and how to color myself, started really appreciating the extra level that colors brings to it, where you kind of understand a figure in the round a little bit better, and lighting and the emotional content of the colors, and what it brings.
Yeah, I prefer the kind of coloring that Peter does. He's kind of an invisible hand colorist, where the coloring's great, but it doesn't draw attention to itself, because
Sure.
that draw attention away from the story.
Right.
I'm an invisible hand writer, and I appreciate it when people do that. Peter, your stuff looks like the natural world. Looks like you've actually seen a real sky. A lot of
you wouldn't know it from my surroundings, where I just try to recreate the pit that I started working in back in the beginning of my career, which was night shift, 11 o'clock to 7 in the morning working on comics. But I appreciate you noticing that. It is my goal to not be noticed, except for just helping to tell your guys' story.
But if you're being invisible, Chuck, and I'm trying to be invisible and let the story tell itself, and Pete's being invisible, it only really needs letterist work. I 6 or 7 blank pages because it's all invisible.
Just lightly visible enough.
Yes. A guiding hand to let people through the story. To me, part of the reason I mentioned the black and white earlier is to me that war stuff is in my head. It's always in black and white purely because of black and white movies, but also like war comics never touched anything beyond World War II. And I suspect the American comics went further than that, but British comics were always totally embedded in World War II, and with the notable exception of a comic called Charlie's War, which was set during World War I, which is if you've never read Charlie's War, it's a phenomenal piece of by Pantazis and Joe Coltrane, who's the artist on that. And so that's part of the black and white thinking in my head is that.
The thing that I think affects my imprints on me are series like Band of Brothers, which completely blew my mind when it came out. Saving Private Ryan. Those were like the more contemporary movies that really affected my choice of colors. So those types of things just embed themselves.
Beautiful on my stuff, so I was very happy with the color work. And I'm kind of wondering, do you find it easier if someone's leaving? Because I know some artists, I tend to draw for black and white, and then it gets colored as a purely as a step that happens. But I know other artists will sometimes draw for color, where they're kind of leaving big wide open spaces. Do you have preference on that?
I don't. I will work with any artist on any style. I love to get feedback from the artist. So just so you guys know, colorists like me, if we can get feedback and if we can get you guys to say something like, "Oh, I'm thinking this," or "I'm thinking that," or if you wanted to write a note in the edge, to me that's like extra icing on the cake for how I do my job. So I'm always open to feedback and things like that.
That's good.
I wish I could have done that a little bit better myself, Pete.
I feel like that with writing too. I like the thrill of having a new writer's style to kind of adjust to. It opens my perspective up a little bit and challenges me to work in a new way. It's exciting.
Yeah, the thing with colors is they're kind of left out of the loop sometimes, because a lot of colorists never see the script.
Right.
I mean, I made the rookie mistake recently of asking for a particular color on something, which I hadn't done in over 30 years, because I've forgotten, the colorist doesn't sometimes see the script, and invariably it's going to come back the wrong color, and it's not his fault. It's just there was no communication.
Right.
Yeah,
that was the editor's fault right there.
Yeah, because I had
last minute too.
I had a character who's in a prison outfit. I actually did a drawing with the color pattern that was to be on the outfit, and it came back black. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's why I hardly ever give color directions. Well, I don't want to tell anybody about their job either, but also it just gets lost in the mix.
Time of day is hugely important. Time of day. Yeah. If you tell me the time of day.
Oh yeah.
On a panel, please tell me the time of day, or if something's happening.
How did you guys find working? Because I come from the British comics tradition where you're doing short stories. You're always doing short stories. How did you guys find short stories? You don't have that 22 pages to breathe, and very often you're packing so much into that to tell a complete story. How did you find that?
Well, I broke it on 8
I'll ask
pages.
Chris.
I did 8
I
pages.
left, so he's
So
sorry.
I did 8-page stories for years. So, you learn a lot because you
Same
got to get
here.
them all in,
Yeah.
especially as a writer. And these weren't like the British weeklies where it's 8 pages that might continue. These would be 8 pages. It's done in one, beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah. Well, like these stories. They were like that. For me, it's hard. I don't really establish a shorthand for a character until I've had a dozen pages or so to kind of warm myself up to them and what their personality is like. It was tricky working on such a short format, but good, rewarding.
Have you done a lot of short stories before, Chris, or are you kind of used to the longer?
Yeah, I started with short stories too. The first year or two of my freelance, probably 80-90% of the work I was doing was for a title called Marvel Comics Presents. And it was all 8-page stories on a bi-weekly schedule. As an inker, I don't have anywhere near the problems that an artist or a writer does with something like that, because I'm just given this stuff to work on. But there's a little bit that I understand about what Karl was saying about having to kind of get comfortable with something and needing a certain amount of pages before you really start feeling comfortable.
We are kind of getting towards the end of our time, so I appreciate all the work that you've done. I did want to talk about the historical accuracy, and all the works that all the help that we've had from historians and archivists, and so I appreciate the efforts that you have all made to portray the material accurately. And just in case we drop out again, there's two things I want to go. First, we had a question coming in from the audience about getting access to these books, and that is key. We definitely want to make sure that everyone is able to get to take a look at these, and they are available free of charge. You can go to ausa.org/MOH. So that stands for Medal of Honor, ausa.org/MOH. And all the individual issues are there, and you can view them and download them to your computer. So we encourage everyone to do that. And then, next year we are going to be, looking at releasing a new batch. It's a little more of a challenge this year with all the archives being closed, but we will be getting started on that project soon. So with just like the last few minutes that we've got here, I did want to kind of have you go each in turn again and just talk about, your personal reaction to the project, and maybe, for Pete and Chuck, who've worked on many issues, maybe talk about one particular figure that kind of stands out for you. And then for the other guys, something that really, struck you that was notable about the individual figures that you were working on. So Chuck, maybe you can start with that.
Yeah, well, it won't come as any surprise to you, Joe, that my favorite to work on was Audie Murphy, because as soon as you introduced me to this project, I was pestering you, when are we going to get to Audie Murphy?
Right.
Such a hero of mine as a kid, both as a cowboy star and a war hero. And, I really enjoyed working on that with Rick Magyar. And, that was a highlight for me. And generally, this whole thing has been a highlight. It's been an honor to tell the stories of these Americans and the sacrifice and courage. I mean, the stories are literally jaw dropping. These guys and Mary as well. These people were superheroes.
Absolutely. How about you, Chris? What stood out for you about Dan Inouye?
Well, as Chuck was mentioning, these people being superheroes, I think somewhere online as a promotion for this webinar, I mentioned Daniel Inouye as being a real-world Captain America. And as I was researching and reading this script, again, I was just kind of blown away that the thing that's similar with all these guys is you're in a life and death situation. In Mr. Inouye's case, I mean, he almost died, and to kind of pick yourself up and go right back into the fray and literally get right in the face of the enemy, and just keep continuing. I mean, that's something that I honestly don't know that I could ever, well, I'll just say right now, I know that I can't do that. I don't know if the situation would ever change that I would actually do something like that. But that's the one thing that impressed me, in particular with his story, is that he was knocked down, got up, knocked down again. I mean, literally, he was shot in the gut, damaged an arm and a leg, and just kept going and survived. Saved many lives.
PJ, how about you with Henry Johnson?
Usual in this gang in that I'm not American. I don't know if you've noticed. And so these stories are all completely new to me. I think the important thing is to treat them with the level of respect they deserve, and to especially the story of the Harlem Hellfighters, and these guys had everything against them, not just the enemy on the battlefield. Coming home was no piece of cake either. So it was just, I mean, for me, it was certainly a matter of getting everything right and making sure you tell it with a degree of respect that you can, that you can do it, and hope that you've done some justice to it, I think. And I hope I have.
I appreciate that. And Karl, tell us a little bit something about Mary Walker that's going to stick with you.
It's like Chuck said, she was just such a superhero. What was remarkable for me was that, all she wanted to do was help people. And she really had to overcome extra stuff being a female in that time and place. Women didn't have any voice. They didn't have any power. They didn't, they certainly weren't doctors. She literally spent her entire life, digging and clawing her way to get into a position where she could help people. And then even once she was in the war effort, it didn't stop with just helping the ones on her side. And in a divided America, I can really relate to this now, where she would, cross enemy lines to treat wounded soldiers on the other side of the field. I think that's a remarkable human being in my eyes, where just all life was worth nurturing and helping. And I think we could all learn a thing or two from her, in our weird divided political lives. She didn't care about any of that. She just cared about the human spirit, and I appreciated that.
And we appreciate your work. I can say on a personal note that my wife was really emotionally struck by the work you did on that book. So thank you for that. And finally, Pete, how about you've helped us out with all the issues. Does someone stand out? And
I think the one that stood out for me was Henry Johnson, rendering that crazy melee. I mean, but to be honest, for me, each one has their own impact-making element to it for me. So because I'm focused on trying to get historically accurate color going on, like Mary Walker's sash being the right color at the right time, the military hardware being used, what color was it? Like if a gas canister had green on it with white stencils, that kind of stuff is the stuff that I try to get right for historical accuracy, and I just hope I'm doing the best job I can when I do it. So, but each one of these stories has been amazing for me to work on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And the coloring job, may be one of the trickiest, since a lot of the old reference materials, either black and white, or even if it's physical artifacts, it's faded over the decades. So you've done a tremendous job with the series, and I appreciate that.
Well, you guys have actually unbelievably helped me by sending me as much reference as you can as well in those scripts with those images. So absolutely helps.
Well, we are fortunate to have a great network
Thanks,
of people in the historical world who are helping out with this project. So I appreciate all their help, and I appreciate all of your work and for your time for being with us here today. So thank you very much, gentlemen. So I just want to thank you, and I want to turn it over for General Swan. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks, gentlemen. More importantly, thank you for the contribution that you've made with these works. I think what I captured from today's discussion is the broad range of people that have served in the U.S. Army. And each of these figures represents a different part of our society. And that's what really is the United States Army. It is people. And you've captured that very, very well. And we hope you'll continue to work on this project with us. So thank you again. Before we close today, for our audience, I want to bring you up to date on some upcoming events that we'll be seeing here in the new year. The first New Year's event in the AUSA Thought Leaders webinar series will be on the 5th of January, where we'll be covering AUSA's new book, Breaching the Summit, Leadership Lessons from the U.S. Military's Best. This book is authored by former Army Sergeant Major of the Army Ken Preston and his service counterparts, senior enlisted advisors from the other military services. That panel discussion should be excellent. And then our first two AUSA noon reports of the new year will bring you on the 12th of January, the current Sergeant Major of the Army, Sergeant Major Michael Grinston, and then on the 19th of January, Army Chief of Staff General Jim McConville. These are just some of the great speakers that we'll have be bringing to you in the coming months and weeks, and we hope you'll be able to join us for any and all of these. For more information on these speakers and other AUSA events, go to the AUSA website at ausa.org. And we always want to thank you for your membership in your Association of the United States Army. Membership matters. We simply cannot bring you these important professional development events without your membership. And more importantly, your membership helps the association support America's Army, our soldiers, Department of the Army civilians, veterans, retirees, and their families. So thank you for your membership. And thank you again as we go into this holiday season, Hanukkah starting today. We want you all to be safe and come back in the new year so you can participate in many of the great events we have here at AUSA. And finally, I would be remiss if I didn't point out on this coming Saturday, the 121st Army-Navy game will be played at West Point for the first time since 1943. That game is at 3 o'clock, so make sure you're tuned in. And with that, have a great Army Day. And go Army, beat Navy.